In terms of audiences, we've got a lot of different internal audiences, whether it's men or women or young adults or singles, parents. But when we think about it in terms of marketing, reaching outside of our church family, we're really looking at people who are non-religious or nominally religious, people who are not attending church. We aren't interested in attracting people that are attending church someplace else. You know, if you got a church home, stay there, that's great. But if you don't have a church home, we'd love to talk to you about what we're doing.
Several years ago, there were some interesting statistics floating around based on a Yankovic report. And basically what it told us was that, young adults just out of college, just starting their first home, first careers, they were drifting. Not just drifting from the Catholic Church, but from organized religion in general.
You have to know the purpose. You have to keep the purpose in mind and keep the purpose at forefront. The underlying purpose doesn't change by audience, but the way you communicate that changes by audience. The way you contextualize that changes by audience. It's not unlike any other communication strategy just because it's for a faith-based community. The people we try to communicate are consumers just like the people all of you are trying to communicate with. The message is different. Hopefully the end goal is different because we're all talking about impacting lives and changing lives one way or another. We're not just selling hamburgers, although as someone reminded me earlier today, most of us need a hamburger every now and then. That's not a bad thing, but it really is focused and purposeful, but it's also contextual.
The question becomes, and this is really what's relevant whether you work for American Century Capital or a hospital or a faith community, it's how you do it. And so we give a lot of thought to the how. Communication and community are at the mission of all of our work. We are trying to give people those the common language, the shared beliefs, those defining moments, whether they're joyful or sorrowful. That is at the crux of the mission and ministry, I think, probably of all of our work.
God summarized our Prophet Muhammad's message. He says, you are nothing but a communicator. You just communicate the message. That's what you do. And be creative. So, for me as a Muslim, we don't have King James. We have just the Arabic text. Fortunately, if you know Arabic, it hasn't changed since 1400 years ago. But we don't change the text. We try to make things more interesting to get it to the level of people of the time.
Making things relevant, whether it's a Gen Xer, a 65 plus, an empty nester, a single out of college, and taking whatever your text happens to be or your word is and making it relevant to where people are at today.
Sometimes younger audiences, we're finding, while they may welcome that in your worlds, in faith communities, they almost resent it. Don't cheapen the gospel by boiling it all down to making me a consumer and tracking me and telling me whether or not what you're saying is hitting me where I live. There's a disconnect there. So again, the ways those are done, the ways that happens, are really dictated by the audience that you're really going after.
Measurement is so difficult, and the larger you are, the more difficult it becomes. We can run an ad, mail a postcard or whatever, and if we have 100 new people show up for the first time and worship for a weekend, we really don't notice because we've got 7,000 to 8,000 people in worship every weekend. That said, there are things that we can measure, and it deals more with, are we meeting the needs of our church family? For example, we will do annual surveys to determine what percent of our members have prayer as part of their daily life. You know, and if that number is growing, we feel like we must be doing something right. We track how many of our members are involved in a Bible study or a small group. If that number is growing, we must be doing something right. So there are things that we can measure. It's just not always the usual marketing, consumer type of things.
I think probably two ways, which are, and it's not uncommon, I would think, in business either, is engagement. Are you seeing that person come to programs, events, activities on a repeat basis? And the other, because many of these are nonprofits that need to fundraise to be able to do their programs and services, is what's happening in the dollar pool. And are the dollars going up? And then to study across that, who are the dollars coming from? Are they concentrated in a small group at the top, and then a wide swath at the bottom, and then balancing how much time you spend here versus there. One of the challenges in the Jewish community has been there have been a number of families that have been very philanthropic at very large levels. The second generation and getting them engaged and involved is a very difficult task.